Imagine pressing play on a video and the very first shot is from the back of a tiger shark, one of the ocean's most deadly hunters. But you're not following the shark, you're riding with it through crystal clear blue Caribbean waters. What you're looking at right now is footage that would have been almost impossible to capture without expensive submarines, massive research ships, or hundreds of scientific divers. But instead, it came from a tiger shark wearing an Insta360 camera. In today's video then, I'm going to be telling you guys all about the wild true story of how researchers turned Caribbean tiger sharks into living, swimming survey drones. By strapping these little cameras and tags onto these apex predators, scientists initially hoped to understand where they went, how they hunt, and what their world looks like day to day. But as the shark cam footage started rolling in, they noticed something strange. Patterns in where the sharks traveled, areas they kept returning to again and again, and something incredible that was hiding just beyond the reach of scientific divers. We're going to be looking at how they got these camera tags on the sharks, the jaw-dropping first clips from a shark's eye view, and how this unexpected partnership between researchers and predators led to a monumental discovery that might just be a game changer for ocean conservation, which could impact, quite literally, the future of life on Earth. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. If you ever thought tiger sharks were simply just ruthless hunters, this story is about to completely flip that upside down. Welcome back to another Shark Bites episode, everyone. Now, I don't think it's an understatement to say that animal-born cameras have completely changed how we as scientists study the natural world. Before they existed, when we were trying to study marine animals, we had to observe them either from the air or from a boat, or we were literally suited and booted in scuba gear observing them from underwater. All of those methods there, as you can imagine, are quite labor intensive and require a lot of on-site hours, especially the underwater ones, because we're limited to how long we can spend underwater. We still use all of those methods, of course, but the invention of animal-born camera tags was absolutely massive in terms of pushing on the science. The devices themselves have got significantly better since they were first trialed on animals back in the 1970s and 80s, and now there are even some so small they could easily fit in the palm of your hands. With these advancements, we now get a first-person view of exactly what that animal sees, hunts, avoids, and interacts with. And because a lot of marine animals, including sharks, can go to places where humans rarely go to, it means that scientists have begun discovering things that they previously might have overlooked or missed entirely. Although, getting these camera tags on the sharks isn't exactly an easy feat. These are big predatory animals, often over 3 meters long, armed with a serious set of teeth, powerful tails, who often have zero interest in sitting still for scientists. Tagging these guys isn't like clipping a GoPro to one of your mates and saying, okay, swim around. You first got to find the shark in the expanse of the open ocean, then safely bring it alongside the boat without injuring the animal or yourself, and then work fast to attach the camera tag on the shark to minimize the amount of stress that it's having to undergo. All while waves are tossing the boat, there's gear everywhere, and there's a literal tiger shark within snapping distance of your hands and arms. It's not an easy thing to do, but the team at Beneath the Waves are top notch. Led by one of my previous collaborators and friends, Dr. Gallagher, Beneath the Waves has been working with sharks in the Bahamas for over a decade now, and through their work have gained some amazing insights into shark behavior, ecology, and movements in this part of the world. Importantly here, they've been instrumental in showing how crucial sharks are for providing something called ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are the benefits that we as humans receive from nature, which could be things like clean air and water, pollination of crops, or simply material things like food or timber. But to be able to show the evidence, though, that sharks are providing us these ecosystem services, Beneath the Waves has been tagging and observing sharks in the Caribbean for a very long time. Some of you might remember myself and the team at Beneath the Waves wrote that research paper together about nurse sharks, classifying their behaviors and revealing how important they are as tertiary predators. That was through observational work through stationary underwater cameras called BRUVs, but back in 2021, the team did some different underwater camera work. This time, instead of dropping stationary cameras down, they were going to attach cameras to the fins of tiger sharks, but not just any cameras. These were 360-degree cameras. I'm sure loads of you will have seen the Insta360 cams across social media in the last few years, especially Instagram. They've definitely boomed amongst underwater content creators recently. But before they became so widely used across social media, Austin and his team decided that they were going to attach one to the dorsal fin of a tiger shark, the first ever deployment of a 360-degree camera on a marine animal. By having a 360-degree angle, it means you can see exactly what is happening around the entire animal, in front, behind, left, right, up and down. That up and down is an important one there because it means you can pretty closely estimate where that animal is in the water column because you can see up towards the surface. Now, other than this being a pretty epic onboard view of an awesome marine predator, when the footage from some of these camera tag tiger sharks came back to the team, one scientist in particular noticed something. Carlos Duarte, a scientific collaborator with Beneath the Waves, was really interested in that seagrass coverage you can see there. It's a well-known scientific fact that tiger sharks, in the Bahamas anyway, are closely linked with seagrass habitats because it's where their turtle prey like to hang out and feed. And using those 360-degree camera angles, they could see that the tiger shark in question spent just over half of its time swimming over this light seagrass habitat. When the seagrass was more prevalent and got denser in its coverage, the tiger shark lowered its position in the water column, tightly hugging the seafloor, likely showing us that that tiger shark realizes in that denser seagrass coverage it's got a better chance of coming across a feeding sea turtle, so it pays to stick low down to the seafloor so it can sneak up on it. But in a private conversation between Carlos and Austin, Carlos noted just how much seagrass was there. It seemed to just go on for miles. And the pair of them realized that this camera-tagged tiger shark might have just revealed to them an even greater discovery than they first thought. If you've ever traveled to South America from North America or vice versa, you'll have likely flown over the Caribbean and the Bahamas. Specifically, you'll have probably flown over the Bahama Banks, which are these huge expansive areas covered in carbonate sediments in relatively shallow water, which averages about 10 meters deep. This shallow water is some of the clearest water in the ocean, and it supports a massive diversity of marine flora and fauna. Sharks, turtles, dolphins, and manatees are all found in decent numbers across the Bahama Banks, and all of them heavily depend on one thing: seagrass. Now, a lot of people out there presume that seagrass is the same as seaweed, but it's not. Seagrass is a flowering plant. Think of them more like an underwater lawn that grows in shallow coastal waters around the world, and they're a really big deal. Not only does it provide important habitat and foraging opportunities for wildlife, like all those marine animals that I just mentioned to you, it's also a vital place for something called blue carbon. Blue carbon is carbon that is stored and sequestered by coastal and marine ecosystems, and seagrass meadows are absolutely incredible at storing carbon. What they'll do is take that CO2 from the atmosphere or from carbon already within the ocean, and via photosynthesis they'll convert that into organic carbon, which is then stored in their leaves and roots, or is buried in the sediment beneath them, where it can remain stored for thousands of years. Seagrass only covers approximately 0.2% of the seafloor, but has been estimated to store up to 10% of all oceanic carbon. Remember, we've always heard about how tropical rainforests are vital for capturing carbon from our atmosphere, and sure, that's true, but seagrass meadows can store carbon up to 35 times faster than a tropical rainforest can. Namely because seagrasses can start that process almost immediately after they've been planted, whereas for tropical rainforest it takes decades for them to mature. But here's the problem. We don't actually know exactly how much seagrass exists globally, and estimates for its coverage can be off by tens of thousands of square kilometers because it's tough to see through water from space, and sending monitoring divers everywhere just isn't feasible. And because of that uncertainty as to how much of it exists, it makes it difficult for scientists to use it in climate strategies, or for us to be able to implement wide-scale protections for it. Going back to our camera tag tiger shark then, as Austin and his team at Beneath the Waves were watching this footage, they realized that they might actually be able to use it to figure out just how much seagrass was spread across the Bahama Banks. So they tagged a few more tiger sharks with camera tags, as well as satellite tags, and turned them into literal biological survey drones who can cover these huge distances that would be too logistically challenging for human divers. And by pairing these tagged tiger sharks with a bunch of human dive surveys and some satellite imagery, they were able to create a kind of three-layered map. In this three-layered map, the satellites predict where the seagrass might be, the human divers check it, and then the sharks expand and refine the picture. And using all three of those data sources, the team were able to estimate a consensus seagrass covered area of at least 66,000 square kilometers and potentially up to 92,000 square kilometers across the Bahama Banks. To give you an idea of how big that is, 66,000 kilometers squared is about the size of the state of Florida, and 92,000 kilometers squared is nearly the size of Minnesota, so we're not talking about a small area here. And based on these numbers, it would make the Bahama Banks seagrass meadows the largest seagrass meadow on planet Earth, blowing the previous largest in Shark Bay, Western Australia, out of the water by a factor of at least 300. 300 times larger than the previous largest. Those numbers are just bonkers. And when you add this newly mapped Bahamian seagrass meadow into the global estimates, it increases the known global seagrass coverage by about 41%. So it's nearly doubled it. Now, why does all this seagrass stuff matter? Well, for a start, it completely changes two conversations. The first is that if global seagrass coverage is a lot larger than we first thought, then the ocean's capacity to store carbon naturally might be bigger than previous models suggested. More seagrass equals more long-term carbon locked away in those sediments, which increases the potential for nature-based climate solutions. We can literally use these ecosystems themselves to balance out the carbon scales. And then secondly, it's completely changed our perception of the Bahama Banks as an ecosystem. Not only is it a vital biodiversity area for big megafauna species like sharks and rays or marine mammals, but it's now also an area that holds globally relevant carbon stocks. And that's not even getting into its capacity to support local economies through tourism or fisheries. Those factors there give policymakers and local communities a really strong scientific basis to argue for protecting these areas and ensuring that they're managed better from a conservation perspective. But maybe the coolest part of all of this is that this research, led by Austin and his team, acts almost as a proof of concept for using animals and their behavior as a mapping tool. Sharks, rays, turtles, and other animals often have strong preferences for certain types of habitat, and if you tag and track them, they can lead you straight to those ecosystems that they rely on. All from a tiger shark tagged with a 360-degree camera that decided to hang out in a big old seagrass meadow. I just think that's so cool. So the next time you see tiger sharks maybe cropping up in the news for the wrong reasons, just remember they can also be amazing research assistants, helping us understand and protect the habitats and ecosystems that we all depend on. Using sharks as literal mappers is such an inventive method, and it kind of reminds me of some scientists on the Pacific Northwest coast of America that did a very similar thing with a salmon shark. But on that occasion, they weren't mapping, they were desperately trying to deal with a hideous ocean anomaly called the blob. And that lone salmon shark, tagged with a suite of scientific equipment, decided that it was going to swim straight into the blob, and you can learn all about it in this video here. Honestly, that salmon shark story was just incredible, and the data that it got back for us was so important, so make sure you give it a watch. I promise you're not going to regret it.